Hey, welcome back to Mystery Garage. In today's episode, we tackle rust repair on the Red Rabbit. Hey, welcome back. So on last episode, we talked about some of the rust issues that were on the front end of this car. I think what we should do is have another look at it one more time and have a quick talk about what we think we should do. I'll discuss some of the things that I find a bit of an issue or things that I watch for when it comes to rust repair. So let's take a look. Okay, so last episode we talked a little bit about the issues that were here in the headlight bucket. And then as you come down here, you can see the pinch welds. Maybe I should move over a little bit. You can see the pinch welds right here are starting to rust up. And then as you move down, this pinch weld seam is supposed to be complete. So as it comes down, you can see it's getting a little rusty, and then it actually unfortunately disappears right here. And there is still, you can see that there's still a mounting tab for the fender, but all this in here is a little bit concerning for me. I'd like to obviously have this car as fresh and crisp as possible. And then when you move over to right here to where one of the charcoal canisters used to sit, there's some rust through. And actually on the other side, hopefully we can see that real quick. The other side of that is just above this battery tray. So it hasn't rusted through, but it's starting to show signs of being an issue. It rusted through a little bit underneath, which you can't actually see. It's in through. There you go, you can see it now. So it rusted through a little bit right under there. So that's a bit of a concern for me. Another concern I want to talk about real quick is underneath on this trim edge that goes all along the front of the car. It's kind of beat up. It's not rusty, but it's bent. I mean, it's got surface rust, but sorry, it's not rusted right through. But it's all kind of bent and mangled up, and I don't know, I'm just not a fan of that. I want to make sure this car is as crisp as possible. But then we get into this portion here, and as I talked about last episode, we got some pretty serious issues here. This should be complete, obviously, through here, and then this little pinch seam comes all the way over to here, which is missing. So you know, take away all the little things that are wrong with this, and you know, you kind of want to start to look at what we can do or what our options are. So when it comes to options, front cut. Obviously there's no rest of the car, it's just a simple front cut I had laying around. It's good to always keep these things, you never really know, and this one's actually in incredible shape. When you look at the headlight buckets, you know, the lighting's not that great, but the headlight buckets are mint. The pinch weld seams that I was talking about before are incredible. All the way down to that bottom part that I was worried about it missing before. You follow the edge all along the front, that's all crisp. And then you go over to the other side, and everything we're talking about that's missing on the other side is completely intact. And this side's even more crisp. So what we want to do, I think, is start to figure out what part of this do we want to transfer over to this. So let's get to measuring things up and seeing what we want to do. Okay, so I've gone ahead and done some measuring. As you can see, I've drawn two lines here. Part of what I want to be certain of is when it comes to these strut towers, you know, I'm not by any means a professional welder, so I like to stay away from a lot of what makes the structural part of the car structural. You know, obviously these frame rails that go out to the front is tied into the core support up here. So that does matter too, but when it comes to the welding I can do, like I'm a pretty decent welder, I'm just not a professional welder. So when it comes to that, I want to make sure I'm making educated decisions on making sure the car stays 100% structurally rigid. So I'm going to stay away from the strut tower repairs or anything to do with that. The strut towers on this car, as you can see, are mint, so there's no issue to that. Everything's forward of that, you know, up in here and that sort of thing. So when it came to making a cut, I started looking at, well, what can I do to keep all the rust cut out, but not get in too far to the strut tower. So I decided to make a line here at first. Measured that up, was pretty happy with it. So what we were gonna end up doing is just taking after this hole, cutting down, and then I was gonna follow the inside of this trim edge because it gives me a consistent place to, when I'm cutting the other front cut, to match that up with. and I stay away from all this rust issue. I also will then be deleting this tray just because I don't like running batteries in the front anyways for the cleanliness. I like to delete that and move it to the back of the car. But anyways, when it comes to this sort of stuff, I can get away from having the issue of tying all this back in. So I'll just cut this up and clean up the frame rail, and then that'll be done. But when it comes to the front, when we chose that cut line, that worked for me and I was pretty happy with that. So when I turned over to the front cut here, the issue is this front cut I took off of I got from a Cabrio. I didn't personally take it off, but somebody else did for me with one of the cars I bought. Cabrios, because they don't have a roof, have this reinforcement plate here for structural rigidity that you would get from having a roof. So having it removed, they did a few other things. So the first mark I did was, as you can remember, was just a little bit back of this bolt hole. That runs right through this reinforcement plate that's double walled, and there's an airspace in here. So I don't want to get into having to weld 2 or 3 different levels of metal because it starts to complicate things. So I decided to cut closer than that pinch seam there and convert that over to this car. So in measuring, I did that. That moved my line from behind the hole to forward of the hole, and then straight down. Obviously, I'm going to clean up that and do that better, and then follow that line down to the bottom. Then the only other tie-ins I'm going to have in the front end, once I've cut this off, is the portion that hits the frame rail. Frame rail in here has some, there's 2 pinch welds here. The bottom is usually untouched, and then the side is untouched as well, and then the top will have a couple welds here. I've actually done this before, twice before, so I do know where the pinch welds are and somewhere where the seams are. So the other seam issue we're gonna have to deal with is right here. So right here there's a weld that the factory puts on and covers it with seam sealer. So we'll have to clean off that seam sealer and cut off that weld, and it's on both sides. So we're also going to find the same thing here, but this one's got a big clump of seam sealer on it, so we'll have to get all that off. Okay, so that's kind of the moral of the story of what we're going to do with it, at least for the front section. So I'm going to get to work and do a lot of the cleanup, and I'll chime back in when I'm ready to start showing you guys what we got. Okay, let's get to work. Okay, so now I've gone and made proper marked lines. I cleaned it all down to the metal, and I chose to go on the flat side, so that way there's no contours or really hard cuts. So I'm going to be straight down this, straight down that on the flat, so it's hard to explain, but anyways, it's going to be on the flat side, so when I make the cut, it's going to be on top of the tape line, so that way I don't have any compound welds going into the corners, because it's not about the weld that's the hard part, it's about making sure the seam lines up when I match them. So I'm going to definitely try and keep it on the flat side so it makes matching the seams easier. And then so I'm going to go ahead and cut that. I also did the same thing on the other side, made the same cut mark. Using tape makes it really easy, because when you get into weird compound bends like this, tape actually just draws a straight line over it, and when you press the tape down, it keeps the line straight. So again, same thing, clean up the cuts. I'm going to do it on the front side of the cut, and then I'm going to make sure that it's always on the flat side, and then when we get this all cut off, I'll tune back in. So that's it for now. Okay, I've gone ahead and made the cuts. You always want to err on the side of caution and cut to this side, and then leave a little bit on the main part of the car that you're keeping. And if you're ever going to be removing material, you want to do the delicate stuff at the very end. So I'll be doing a final final grind when I get ready to remove this part. So I also cut the other side. Maybe you can see that, maybe you can't. I made the cut down here as well, all the way down, and then again chase that edge. So the important part here, what I'm going to do next, is I'm actually going to remove this chunk, so that way I can see in where the frame comes out to the support, the front rad support, is in there. It's a little bit of complicated angles. As you can see, it gets all involved here, so it's important for me to because I'm going to keep this portion, it's important for me to work around it and make sure I keep it properly. So in order to do that, I want to gain access through this side to be able to clean up the side. So I'm going to make a cut just rough, kind of right around here, down there, and then remove this chunk so that way I can see into where I want to go. And I'm going to do the same thing for the other side. Okay, let's get to work. There we have it. I've cut out that gap. Now it gives us access to complications in here. This is the only complicated part of this whole, or at least what I call a complicated part of this whole thing, is you can't really see, the lighting's kind of terrible, but there's a bead of weld underneath this frame rail right here. Maybe I can show you that. Give me 1 second. So right in here, there's a bead of weld underneath this frame rail that goes out to the front rad support. So that bead has to be cut out. And if we come around the inside here, or outside, sorry, I can show you. There's 2 spot welds right here, and there's a weld that goes on the outside of this frame rail, so on this side, goes along the bottom here, and then that weld that I showed you underneath is right across the back here. So it goes back here, down here, and then pinch welds here. And this part actually separates from this frame tube. So I guess the important part to remember is all I need to keep is this tube in immaculate shape. What's all around it I can get rid of. And when we go to over to the frame cut, same sort of deal. I want to keep this metal part, but I don't need to keep this frame section. So when it comes to cutting this seam that goes along here and the one that goes along the bottom, I can actually hack this, cut this front tube off, and get this whole thing out, and then I can lay it on the floor and delicately cut where I need to cut so I can keep this front rad support, and I don't need this chunk here. So it's a little bit of surgery, but it's not that complicated if you take your time. The problem is you don't want to rush any of this stuff and make mistakes, because mistakes cause it harder to get everything back together properly. So under here again, there's a weld going underneath the side of this part, and then on the outside again, there's two pinch welds here, or sorry, not pinch welds, spot welds here, weld down the side on that I just showed you, and then weld along right here along the back. So I'm gonna have to get to work on that, and then what's gonna eventually end up happening is this whole rad support section will just come right off, or at least that's the goal. As you can see, I've cut right through, so the only thing sitting there now is this part. Once it's separated from those tubes, we'll just pull off. Okay, I guess I'll agree. This isn't really for the faint of heart, but it's kind of the whole point of this channel. There we go. You know, the whole point of this channel is to prove that anybody can do it in their own garage without, you know, a lot of expensive tools or anything like that. So all I did here was, if we walk over to the rad support, the simplest way I always do it is to cut around that square, then cut down the side on the the back, and then down the side. And what happens is this rad support separates off. Then you have the opportunity, or sorry, what you're left with, I should say, is this kind of a rough cut type scenario where you have a bit of the rad support still there. You have some rough cuts around the edges, and you can see where I've used the Sawzall just to cut down the side. And maybe I can show you the back a bit. So there's a rough cut there of where I just left it off what I could reach. Now, what happens is, come over to this side, when you get it all off, now you can have access. You can see in this side, the bottom right there isn't supposed to be there, but I left it there when I cut it out because it made it easy for me. So when I go over to this side, I've taken that piece out now and I've prepped it all. You can see all the edges have been filed and sanded, all smooth, ready to go. I've cleaned up all the weld locations. When you look underneath, it's all neat and tidy. So that's where the new part, sorry, my hand's in the way. That's where the new part will lay across the bottom and go all the way over to the other side there. So you gotta have it all cleaned up, and it's really not that hard to do. You know, the challenge will be, you know, when it comes to taking this rad support off and ensuring that all of that same stuff in reverse is done properly. So I'll have to take my time with that. But again, taking your time with everything is important, and anybody can do this. I don't have any skill set that all of you guys wouldn't have. So anyway, it looks kind of scary right now. You know, my wife came out and kind of panicked. The front of the car was cut off. But at the end of the day, we'll be able to show you how I can put that back on. All right, well, I got some work ahead of me cleaning up this other post, and then I'll start looking at doing the exact reverse of this. Leave it to me for a little while and we'll see what we can get done. And there we are, all cleaned up. So I got, this one's all sorted and cleaned up. This one's all sorted and cleaned up. I think next what I want to do before I get too crazy and cutting into the other one, I want to remove this battery tray. It's kind of hard to see, but there's two spot welds in here. So generally what I do with this is I cut away a little bit more and then you rock it a bit, but you got to get rid of, hopefully you can see that, you got to get rid of this part first. So once that happens, this part can start to rock. It is welded, spot welded on the top of the back of the trans mount, so up here. So I'm just going to deal with those. Next time you see it, this won't be here. There we are. Okay, so we've gotten that figured out. It's time to start looking at this. I got to start doing some measurements and figure out kind of how I want to do this part, and we'll move on to that. So I've measured a little bit more than I need to have, and I did that for a reason. I feel like it's always better to have more metal on the piece that you're going to keep than it is to have not enough. So I've actually, the distance that I cut off of the red car was about 13.25 inches. This is actually set up to be about 14, a little shy of 14. So I have a little bit to use there to make up for any kind of gapping. And I'm also going to cut, when I cut this, I'm not going to cut on the flat, I'm going to cut slightly on the round. So I have a nice amount of extra material if I need it. And you know, in the front, when it comes to these frame arms, I'm just going to actually slice right through it. And like I said before, I'm going to end up cleaning it up once I have it off. So this part should be pretty quick. I'm just going to hack, same thing with the other side. And then I'm going to cut straight through the frame rails on both sides, and we will have it off, and then there'll be some cleanup work to do. And there we have it. I'm not gonna lie, this one was a lot of work to get it off. I wanted to make sure I didn't damage anything inappropriately, so when I made the cuts, I spent the time to do it. Getting these frames to be cut in a way that I could easily then remove them afterwards was the challenge. It's really hard to cut down the side of this with this wall so close, what I ended up doing is cutting 3/4 of the way around with a cut-off wheel, and then actually using a sawzall with an extremely long blade to get down in between there. It won't be a problem to get it back on the car, because it never really is, because they don't ever weld or do anything with this side of it, and they don't do anything with the top portion. So it'll just be the sides that you can access in the car, so that's not a problem. As far as this goes, like I said, I left more material there so I can remove some to make it fit those exact cuts. So I'm not too worried about that. I think that was a better choice rather than trying to do exact right off the half cut. So there we go. This metal is all a lot newer. The cabriolet that this front cut came from was obviously a newer car. Small little changes. Things like the hood prop is a plastic prong, whereas I cut it off. Where the old one was a metal unit attached to the rad support. So small little changes like that. There's lots of little other stuff. That was just an example. But anyways, I'm very happy that we got this all sorted out. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to roll it over. As you can see now, I have full access all the way around to cut and remove that frame portion as well as that one. So leave me to it. And there we have it. So it was a little bit of work, but we got it all cut off and we got it all trimmed up. And so now I have it set up where it's just kind of resting in the car. I have the seams overlapping right now. And inside you can see I have it set up like it was factory. It's a little bit off because I have these weird overlaps on the sides, but we'll get that set up. So what I have set up right now is on this side. You can see it better than the other side. I've lined up the two seams and I've marked it. So that way I know the mark is going to be exact when I put it together. So what I have to do now is quickly pull it off, and I'll trim those two sides up, and then it should be ready to basically weld in. But what I'm going to do while I have the front end off, which is kind of a benefit of doing this now, is I'm going to do a lot of the bay shaving before I weld the gray unit back on. It allows me to be able to climb in there and roll in there in my seat, pay attention to a lot of the details in here. So some of these holes will probably end up filling. Some of the bracketry I'll end up cutting off and cleaning up. A lot of these, some of the hoses and stuff, I'll be getting rid of that, and really get into a situation where I'm going to kind of shave most of the bay. Now I'm not going to go crazy on it, so I'm not sure, but I don't think I'm going to be covering all this up with a flat panel. I don't know, I might change my mind on that, but I'm going to get rid of a lot of the stuff I don't need. Obviously we're going to peel this booster off, as well as the master needs to be replaced anyways, but we'll peel the booster off, clean it all up, get it painted. I'll pay attention to a lot of the details down below, and everything else, like I said before, we'll clean it all up and figure out what we're going to leave, what we're not going to leave, and then I'll probably get to welding this on. So right now I'm going to quickly trim it up and get to work here, and then I'll show you guys it all trimmed up and set in place, and we'll go from there. And there we have it. As I said, not a lot of tools needed, and we got there. So I've done some final trim up. We'll need, I would say it's 98% ready. We'll need to do a little bit more trimming before final weld, but like I said, I want to do a little bit of bay cleanup before we get to that point. As you can see on this side too, the seam butts up real nice. It looks like there's a gap there, but it's just because the pliers have loosened up a little bit. But the seam all the way around touches real nice. So pretty happy with how it turned out. Next episode we'll do a little bit more repair up here, which is nice about having a front cut, because this portion right here is mint. So we'll cut that off and replace it over here. And then I actually found a little spot down here which we'll also steal from the front cut, and we'll take that little portion right there and replace it. Super handy to have. Happy how things have gotten. So all in all, front is way nicer. Let's look at that pinch weld down. Again, if you take a look at the light bucket, now it's mint all the way to the bottom. This whole thing, zero rust there. Pinch weld up the front side. Again, mint. Same thing with the other side. Nothing wrong with that light bucket. Perfect. Down the pinch weld. Again, zero rust. And that whole lower lip is in great shape. Well, that's it for this week's episode, guys. Thanks very much for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe to these videos. Don't forget to tap that bell. But thanks very much. Until next time, take care.